Okay, we are going to solve 562 minus some number equals 387. We're going to see various different ways of how we solve this problem. $175. How many of you agree with that? So out of the class, we have the majority of you with your hands up. How many of you solved it this way? Or a way similar to this? Okay, somebody that did not solve it this way, raise your hand. And let's have, Wally, come on up. And I'm going to add a new page. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to solve it the way that you did. 562 minus some number equals 387. How many of you know how to do the traditional subtraction with borrowing? Okay, so there's some of us that know, but not all of us. So what he's doing right now is he is solving this problem by subtracting columns. And if he doesn't have enough in each column, he's borrowing from the column next to it. So 2 cannot subtract 7, so we borrowed 10 from our 60 and came up with 12. And then he did the same exact thing because 5 now cannot borrow or cannot subtract 8, so he borrowed 100 from that 500 to make 150 minus 8, or 80. That came up with 70. And then he had 400 minus 300, came up with 175. How many of you solved it using the traditional way you solved it, or the subtraction problems? This is how most of your parents learned how to do subtraction. What our first student did with the example would have been unheard of if we would have came to school and solved our subtraction problems that way. Most likely, I probably would have been told by the teacher that I was wrong and I needed to do it the way that was taught. So I really like both examples. One example makes it a little bit easier because we're counting up. We start in kindergarten learning how to count, and we start counting up by numbers. Then they start getting more difficult, and that's what our first method really showed, counting up. Did somebody do it another way? Okay. Not yet. Mr. Arendelle, come on up. I'm going to move this because I want to keep this on the page. And if you can do it in either blue, black, or green. we got down to that number.
And 62 plus 100 and 10 plus 3 equals 175.
How many people did it that way? Similar. How many of you, when solving this subtraction problem, how many of you stayed with subtraction and subtracted numbers? Okay, how many of you did addition? You turned the subtraction problem into an addition problem and solved it. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to open up both pages so we can see it, because what I think is pretty unique with these two problems, the way that our first person did it, we turned this problem here into an addition problem where we worked our way up from the answer, okay? And then on the opposite side, we started with our number, we worked our way down to it, okay? And one of the things that I noticed with both people is we started by doing something with a landmark number. What did we first do to make our problem easier? And both people did it in their very first step. Well, you chose one of the two numbers, but then what did they do? They did something to make their problems easier to work with. What did they do? They broke it down, but what did each of their first answers equal? Something with zeros in it. If it's in the tens place, hundreds place, it's easier to count up and down if we're starting with something here, with zero. So, for example, 500 going down, 499, and all the way down. And he picked numbers that he could easily count by in his head. We know 500 minus 100 is 400. Instead of doing 500 minus, I don't know, he could have started with 562 and he could have subtracted 18. Which, would that have made the problem any easier? No, would not have made the problem any easier. So we used what we call landmarks to solve this. I thought this was very creative that we actually had two examples, 1, 2, that used the exact same method to solve the problem, but solved it with the opposite tool of either subtraction or addition. So it's pretty clever. Now we had a student that says they know how to check. And we're going to use this one to check our work. So I'm going to make the page big again. And I would like that student to show us how to check this. So if you could come up. Okay. And I'm going to bring us to a new page. Okay. See if I can copy all this. I'd like you to show me how to solve it. Come on. Just pick up a pen and you can show us how to solve it. Okay. Show us how to solve that, how to check our work. If you do not know how to check work, this is a great example to see if your subtraction problem or your addition problem was actually correct. So he takes his answer and he's adding it to the answer in the actual problem. 387 plus 175 equals 562 is what you started with. Very good. Okay, very quietly you can clear off your desk. Thank you very much for sharing.